Starting off at quarterback, I actually am going to give the edge to Arch over John Mateer. Originally, I think I had John Mateer as a better quarterback in my top 10 quarterbacks video than Arch Manning, but if you had to ask me now, Mateer has regressed. Whether it's all because of the injury or not, he has regressed, and Arch really took a step up at the end of last year. I still think that Arch right now is still worse than we thought Arch was going to be at the beginning of last year, but I still think that Arch is a top 5 quarterback. I know Joel Klatt just said that Arch was his second highest quarterback in the country, which I'm not that high on Arch, but I definitely think that Arch is really good. I'm going to give him the nod over John Mateer. At running back now, this one was a little bit interesting because a lot of these guys are new faces on new teams, specifically for Texas, as they get Hollywood Smothers from NC State and then Raleek Brown from Arizona State. And compared to Oklahoma with Torrey Blaylock and Xavier Robinson, this running game for both teams has been very up and down. Last year, even with Contravion Wisner, Texas was not very good at running the ball. You look at Oklahoma, they also were very inconsistent with running the ball. And a lot of the time became the John Mateer show, and John Mateer wasn't healthy, so they lost a couple of games they probably shouldn't have lost. So I think that is kind of a problem, and I definitely just think that even though Texas is getting guys from new schools, and I usually like proven production on a roster more than transfers, these guys from NC State and Arizona State do have production that has been more impressive and better than what Oklahoma has had. So I am going to give Texas the edge at running back. At wide receiver, same story. Texas has a lot of guys from different teams, but their proven production has been incredible compared to Oklahoma. So Cam Coleman obviously coming from Auburn, and then they were returning Ryan Wingo and Emmett Mosley. And then for Oklahoma, they have Isaiah Satania, who was probably the actually most proven wide receiver out of all these guys. Cam Coleman just hasn't had a lot of production because he's been at Auburn. Isaiah Satania was great last year. He's a great down the field receiver. And then Parker Livingston, who used to play for Texas, who was their wide receiver 1 for the first half of last year. And then Texas kind of kicks him out. He goes to the rival. He goes to Oklahoma. But for Texas's projected starting wide receivers, for Cam Coleman, Ryan Wingo, and Emmett Mosley, they have the highest production last year. Over 2,000 yards and 15 touchdowns combined from those 3 wide receivers. Isaiah Satania and Parker Livingston do have a lot of production, but it's not 2K 15 touchdowns production. So I definitely think that Texas is going to have a veteran, experienced wide receiver core over Oklahoma. For tight end, I think it's close, but I am going to give it to Oklahoma. Hayden Hansen from Florida, he's like 6'8". I think he's a junior or a senior. He's a veteran guy. He's freaking huge. He can block. He can catch. And then for Michael Masunas from Michigan State for Texas, Michigan State was awful last year. I just want to see it first, and Florida actually was pretty good in the run blocking game. Their offensive line actually was pretty decent last year. So I'm going to give it to Oklahoma. It is close, but I am going to give it to Oklahoma just because of the run blocking upside that Hayden Hansen has that I don't really know about Michael Mansusins. So I know I'm butchering his name, but I'm going to give it to Oklahoma. Offensive line, I am also going to give it to Oklahoma. Oklahoma this year returns 4 starters, almost all sophomores, so they are all young guys that have meshed together for 2 years, now going into the 3rd year. I will say they did allow 29 sacks last year. You have to kind of account for the schedule with that. They played a brutal schedule last year, plus Mateer took a lot of sacks because he tries to extend plays that wasn't really on the offensive line. So I definitely think that Oklahoma returning 4 starters, that's usually a key to having a top 5, top 10 offensive line. And then for Texas, they were returning 3 starters. They allowed 23 sacks. My thing with Texas, even though they allowed less sacks, I think that Texas had better weapons that Arch could get the ball out more in time. And also the offensive line, this statistic only encapsulates like passing statistics. On the ground, Oklahoma was a better run blocking offensive line than Texas. I don't think both weren't great, but I think Oklahoma was a little bit better. So offensive line, I am going to give it to Oklahoma. So on offense, Texas leads 3-2. And then now I want to get the input of Wyatt Zang, what he thinks about this Texas offense.
Yeah, so starting off with offensively. I think offensively, you could point at Texas and say, well, look at this guy they got, Hollywood Smothers, Raleek Brown, Cam Coleman, Ryan Wingo's back. You could look at even deeper than that. You could go to Jermaine Bishop, who they're bringing in from high school as a wide receiver, who I think is going to be a standout. So you look at all these guys on Texas's roster, Arch Manning again. You look at all these guys on their offensive roster, and they all look really good. Like you are loaded in terms of talent and blue chip players. Like Texas is loaded in that. But you got to look in terms of development as well, and guys that have been playing together a long time. Guys like Hollywood Smothers, Raleek Brown, and Cam Coleman are all transfers. So the question is, do they all play, as one? When you look at Oklahoma, I could pull up their depth chart. They're not bringing in a ton of transfers that they're really gonna need to really rely on. Now, yes, there's some guys behind an Isaiah Sategna or a Jamichael Carter, but at wide receiver. But looking at Oklahoma, they're bringing in less transfers, which could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. Again, we'll see here in terms of fall camp and stuff. But for offensively, I think you look at Texas and say they have the better offense. You can look at Oklahoma and say, well, they're maybe more experienced. But as for offense, I would say Texas has the edge. If Texas's offensive line gets better this year and they can run the ball and they can just protect Arch Manning, I think they'll be okay. And I think they're going to have one of the top 5 offenses in the country. Oklahoma, I don't think is going to quite have a top 5 offense. I don't think they're going to quite have a top 10. I think they'll definitely have top 15, maybe top 12. So again, I think Texas has the slight offensive advantage. When you look at talent, it's obviously Texas. But when you look at just overall the way that those players are performing, I think it's slightly Texas. So I would say Texas, to me, has the better offense.
Now on defense, starting on edge, I am going to give it to Texas. I just think the combination of Colin Simmons and Lance Jackson, those two guys had a combined of 14 sacks last year compared to Taylor Wine, Danny Okoye. They're replacing a ton on the defensive line for Oklahoma, only 7 sacks. So I'm going to give edge to Texas. I think that was pretty clear. And plus, also for Oklahoma, losing R. Mason Thomas to the NFL draft is really tough. That was your best edge rusher last year, which is why I'm going to give it to Texas. For defensive tackle, I actually am going to give it to Oklahoma as they have David Stone, and I have David Stone better than Hero Kanu, which hurts me to say because Hero Kanu, former Buckeye on that national title team, he goes to Texas, was pretty decent last year. There was a lot of depth at defensive tackle, but they lose some of that depth, and it was kind of a little bit disappointing as they weren't able to stop the run great last year. They were good. They weren't amazing at it. And I definitely think that David Stone, who is one of the best defensive tackles in college football, is better than Hero Kanu at Texas. So I'm going to give defensive tackle to Oklahoma. For linebacker, I'm going to give it to Texas. They lose a lot. They lose Anthony Hill, their Mike linebacker last year, but they do bring in Rasheem Biles, who was at Pitt last year, was one of the best linebackers in the ACC. I wanted him so badly at Ohio State. He goes to Texas. And then for Oklahoma, they have Owen Heineke, who I like. I like Owen Heineke, but Rasheem Biles, we don't know confirmed if his game in the ACC will translate to the SEC. We've seen that kind of flutters out sometimes, but I definitely like his upside, so I'm going to give linebacker to Texas over Oklahoma. For DB, I am going to give it to Oklahoma. I think that Eli Bowen and Cortland Guillory are better than Bo Mascu and Kobe Black. I think also both of these teams don't really have a star-studded DB this year. You look at last year, Texas had Michael Taft, who was, nickel safety. Like, he would play all over the place. Both of these teams don't really have a safety or a cornerback like that. So it kind of comes down to depth and experience. And I think Oklahoma has more depth than Texas at DB. Then for safety, I'm going to give it to Texas. I think Jelani McDonald, returning guy, kind of taking over for Michael Taft, has more experience than Peyton Bowen for Oklahoma. So I'm going to give it to Texas for safety. And then I want to talk to Wyatt again. We'll hop over to Wyatt again and see what he thinks about who has maybe the better defense this year in college football.
Defensively, or on the defensive line, I would say it probably would have to go to Texas because Oklahoma is bringing in a lot of newer guys and they're also losing a lot on the defensive line. Or Oklahoma's losing a lot on the defensive line. And you look at Texas's defensive line, Colin Simmons returns, Hero Kanu returns, Alex January returns. Like those are three guys out of their four starters that are returning. Oklahoma returns one out of their top four starters. So defensive line, I'm giving that to Texas all day. Linebackers, I actually think that's where I go more towards the Oklahoma side because Texas just lost Anthony Hill, one of the best linebackers that Texas has had over the last probably 2, 3 years. They also lost Trey Moore, who was their second linebacker. So they're losing a lot at linebacker. That could be a potential spot where they could struggle. And they're not really bringing in a ton of linebackers. They're bringing in one guy, Tyler Atkinson, from college or from high school, who I think is going to be phenomenal. He's a 5-star, but again, he is a freshman, so we can't really count on freshmen to be, the centerpieces of this defense. So I think linebacker definitely has to go to Texas or to Oklahoma, and I would say DB also has to go to Oklahoma because as I said earlier, Oklahoma returns 3 of their top defensive backs, and Texas returns 1 of their top 3 defensive backs. So in terms of overall defense, I'm actually going to slightly lean Oklahoma, which could be a hot take. I don't know what other people are saying about, which offense is or which defense is better. But for me, I think I lean towards Oklahoma. They have the deeper, more experienced roster on the defensive side of the ball. So defense, I give to Oklahoma. Offense, I give to Texas. And that's why this is going to be a phenomenal game. Texas's offense versus Oklahoma's defense. Who can win that battle is probably, in my opinion, who's going to win the game.
Yeah, and that's kind of a similar thing that I had. I mean, I gave Texas offense, and then defense I gave to Oklahoma. Kind of with linebacker, I think Rasheem Biles from Pitt, I think I'm pretty sure he's starting. Will that game completely translate? I don't know. But Owen Heineke, this linebacker room for these two teams last year have kind of taken.
Yeah, you're right. I did miss Rasheem Biles. Yeah, you're right.
And then, but yeah, so edge I gave to Texas. I actually did give defensive tackle to Oklahoma. I love David Stone. I also love Hero Kanu. Used to be at Ohio State. So I remember him as a player. And then safety I gave to Texas. But yeah, it was back and forth. But overall, yeah, I would give Oklahoma defense. And then to finish this out, special teams, I am going to give it to Oklahoma, even though all of their mishaps, even though Texas has Ryan Niblett. Kicker is such a big thing for special teams, and Oklahoma has the Lou Groza winning kicker, and Texas has a freshman 5-star kicker who did hit 65 plus in high school, but he's still a freshman, even though he is a 5-star. And then for coaching, I actually think it's a toss-up because Texas offensively developed so well last year compared to where they were at the beginning of the year. And then for Oklahoma on defense, it was just incredible. Them being able to manage that schedule last year and make the CFP winning, I think 4 or 5 of their last 6. But Texas has lost big game after big game. They got into OT against Kentucky and Mississippi State. And then Oklahoma blew a 17-point lead at home in the playoffs against Alabama. Plus the way they mishandled, the injury with John Mateer. The coaching is very back and forth. I think Sark is a better coach, but Brent Venables has coached better the past couple of years. So I'm going to say it's a toss-up. I think the coaching is a toss-up. It's so back and forth. And then for home field advantage, it is a neutral site. So at the end, I think Texas has a better offense. I think Oklahoma has a better defense. And then for me personally, Texas wins the matchup 6-5-2. They won 6 matchups. Oklahoma won 5, and there were 2 toss-ups. So I think it's very close. And then if you slide Oklahoma coaching, then it's a complete tie. And then neutral field is also a tie. So if you want to give coaching to Oklahoma, then we're deadlocked. I think both of these rosters are very similar. I just think that, overall, Texas having the better quarterback, running back, wide receiver trio, that means a lot, and that's something that I think they're going to be able to take advantage of over Oklahoma. But I want to hop over to Wyatt again, kind of see what he thinks about who has the better total roster, and if we're going to draft a team, who would you want to draft? And then in kind of total roster, if you were drafting a roster, would you rather draft Texas's offense and defense or Oklahoma's offense and defense?
This is where I think I would go full Texas, because Texas has definitely the better offense, and defense is close, as I gave to Oklahoma. But for drafting a team, if I was to pick a straight team that I would rather have, it would be Texas. Like, you can't pass up on what Texas has to offer and the potential they have. I think the key word for Texas this year is going to be potential. The key word for Oklahoma is going to be experience. Now, again, potential, that's unknown, so it could be a phenomenal team. It could also be an average team. But I think for Texas, it's the type where it's like you could buy their stock and that stock could rise or it could stay, relatively average. So I think for Texas, I would take their roster over Oklahoma's as a whole.